Hello students, I am Dr. Suman Prakash and today we are going to discuss one very important topic, differently able learners. As the name suggests, differently able learners are also called as learners with disabilities. These learners have potentials just like the normal children, but due to certain environmental restrictions, they face some problem in showing their abilities. That is, it is very difficult or sometimes they find it difficult to actualize their potentials which normal children can easily do. Dear student teacher friends, while teaching you will come across a variety of learners. At one hand, some of them you will find learning at a faster rate than others. Some you may find requiring representations while learning. Some of them you will find requiring repetitions while learning. Some of you may find experiencing some visual problems and sometimes the two of different types. Some may have hearing problems while others may have problems in walking. On the other hand, you will find some learners who learn at comparatively faster rates with others. Some may have very good memory, whereas some may have creative skills better than others. In this way, you will find learners of three categories on the basis of their comparison in terms of their abilities. These abilities areas are communication abilities, intellectual abilities, sensory abilities, physical abilities, emotional abilities, and behavioral abilities. One group of learners have higher ability and skill than others, while some may have relatively lesser abilities and skills in comparison to the normal students. And the related term with differently able learner is also learner with disabilities. Thus, we find learners of three categories. First, that is the learners with higher abilities than the normal children. These are called gifted or creative children too. Second, we have normal children. This group consists of majority of the learners with whom we compare other learners and whom we see abundant across us or around us. Third, we have learners with comparatively lower abilities than the normal children. These are called as children with disabilities or differently able learners. As we know that variation or diversity is a natural part of human development. For example, some people develop better communication, some people develop intellectually better, or say emotional abilities higher or better than others. As a result, human beings have diverse abilities and every human being is different than others. Study of and teaching to children who are different from other norms or who are different from others, who are different in relation to the norm or the normal children, will learn about various ways and get insight how such children develop and learn. A child is considered as an exceptional when his or her differences or disabilities occur to such an extent that school and educational practices need to be modified in order to better serve their needs. This group includes both group of children, first who have higher abilities than the normal children, as well as the children who possesses comparatively lesser abilities than the normal one. Thus, we can see that the term, when we use the term children with exceptionalities, it includes both the individuals. That means those who have higher abilities as well as those who have lesser abilities. Similarly, we can have another examples to better understand differently able learners. And here we can take the example of case of visual impairment. The term differently able refers to the group of children who, due to any developmental or intellectual, mental or emotional or physical or sensory impairment, they face some restrictions or hindrance in actualizing their full potentials while participating in the society on an equal basis with others. Children with disabilities, the two, like normal children, have equal potentials available with them, and they are the children first, and later they are children with disabilities, and we as teachers should never undermine their potential that is available with them. These children also do the same things, but given their abilities and restrictions, they do things differently, and that's why we use the term differently able learners. In this way, we can understand from one more example. Suppose there is a child with visual impairment. Despite his or her normal intelligence and physical development, he or she may face a series of problems while interacting in the society or while interacting with the society. In classrooms, while reading and writing, due to lack of sight, the child faces a kind of hindrance. Though the child may be capable of reading given normal intellectual development of the child. However, due to sensory loss, that is loss of vision, he or she faces problems in communication and hence restrictions in coming up to their full potentials. We can take the example of a child having orthopedic or locomotor disability too. Another example that we are taking, in this case, such a child may have normal intellectual and communication development, but due to problems in movement and locomotion, he or she may face difficulty in attending classes at par with normal children. He or she may face some sort of emotional problems too, if they are not properly accepted by their peers and family members. Similarly, depending upon the body part affected, they may face problems in writing or drawing or movement of their body parts even in desirable manner, which is required for education or any other purpose of our life. All these problems may restrict the child to some extent or sometimes to a larger extent in coming up with their full potentials. From above examples, we can conclude that differently able children too have potentials like normal children. However, due to restrictions caused to them by the environment they live in, the chances of actualization of their potentials become less in comparison to the normal children. Therefore, such children need modification of the school services to benefit them in coming up to their full potentials and expectations. Depending upon their needs, these children need specially qualified teachers. Depending upon their needs, these children need specially qualified teachers who are capable of using different methods of teaching learning. Second, they need modification of school infrastructure in terms of availability of ramps, wide doorways, anti-skid floor, etc. Third, they need assistive materials like braille slate and books, walking canes, hearing aids, large prints, etc. Fourth, they need, in addition to this, adapted teaching learning materials like storyboards, tactile maps and charts, and these are also needed to facilitate such children to learn in a better way. Fifth, they need various concessions like relaxation of one language in board examinations. In this way, the above modifications in the education system is required to facilitate differently able learners to overcome their hindrances and assist them in actualizing their potentials. This is important to note here that just like normal children, differently able children too have potentials. But at the time of interaction with the environment, restrictions caused by physical, emotional, communication, sensory and behavioral factors, their abilities seems to be less or different. However, with appropriate support and appropriate modification in the educational services, we can benefit them a lot. Due to these factors, differently able children seem to be of diverse types than the normal children. Actually, the diversity that exists among the differently able children or children with disabilities is much more higher than the diversity that exists among the normal children. This diversity exists not only in comparison to the normal children, but within their group this diversity is very high, and this diversity is so wide that it is very difficult to categorize such children for the sake of our convenience and understanding. There are so many schemes of classification used to classify learners with disabilities or differently able learners. But here today we are going to discuss one of our recent legislation, that is Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. In short, it is also called as RPD Act 2016. We are discussing this act and the classification mentioned in this act because this act has a reflection of the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNCRPD 2006. The mandate that this act have and the classification that this act has stated, this is in tandem with the global trends of classification, wherein disability has now been accepted as a human diversity. This has accepted as a human form of diversity. This act gives latest account of disability classification in our country, and there is a very comprehensive coverage of disability. That's why today, in order to better understand differently able learners, we are going to discuss the classification that is there in the recent act of RPD 2016. Out of larger cohort of children with disabilities, that is differently able children with wide range of differences in their behavioral manifestations and potentials, this RPD Act 2016 draws a group of such children who possesses more than 40% functional loss in a particular disability area discussed below. Those who possesses or suffer with more than 40% loss of any disability, in terms of any disability or in any disability category, they are identified as eligible for government schemes. This group needs more extensive and intensive support. This group has higher support needs than other children and persons with disabilities. The specified disability in this act are quantified in measurable terms and classified into a total of 21 categories of disabilities, including 7 major categories which we will discuss. Those persons with disabilities who need extensive and intensive support, according to this act, they are called as persons with benchmark disability. That means their loss in terms of their functionality is 40% or more. Out of the 21 category of disability mentioned in the 7, there are 7 major categories in this RPD Act, and which are as: first of them is physical disability, second is intellectual disability, third is mental behavior, fourth is disabilities due to chronic neurological conditions, fifth disabilities due to blood disorders, sixth disabilities due to multiple disabilities, and the last, that is seventh one, is any other categories to be notified later. First, physical disabilities. Physical disabilities are related to the lack of physical vitality of individuals concerned. These disabilities arise due to one or more conditions of the physical abnormality, resulting into lack in terms of physical ability of the individuals. On the basis of underlying features, it is further divided into 4 subgroups called as locomotor disability, lack of sensory abilities in seeing, third, lack of sensory ability in hearing, and fourth, lack of ability in speech and language. First of the physical disability is locomotor disability. This type of disability is associated with the problems a person experiences while moving an object or his or her own body parts or the whole body, like hands or legs, either whole or partial. This disability is caused by problems in the neuromusculoskeletal system of the body. On these bases, it is further classified into 5 categories: cerebral palsy, dwarfism, muscular dystrophy, acid attack victims, and leprosy cured persons. First, cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy is a complex neurological condition of the body due to which either whole body movement or movements of the body parts and muscular coordination of the body are affected, and the person faces difficulty in his day-to-day life functioning. Second of this part is dwarfism. Dwarfism is a medical condition whereby the maximum height of an adult individual grows up to maximum of 4 feet 10 inches, that is 147 centimeter total or less. Third is muscular dystrophy. Muscular dystrophy is a progressive medical condition in which muscular strength of a person degenerates as his age grows up. This is a progressive disease condition and it affects part or the full body of the person who suffers and progressive problems in the muscular movement. Thus, the person concerned faces restrictions in all the day-to-day life tasks which require movement of the body parts like walking, moving around, holding or catching objects. Fourth is acid attack victims. The persons who suffered or are victimized of acid assault or any other corrosive chemicals on their body. This includes whole or partial body disfigurement. Fifth of physical disability category is leprosy cured persons. Leprosy cured persons are those individuals whose disease of leprosy has already been cured. However, still they suffer from either loss of sensation in the upper or lower limbs or both, that is hands or feet and in eyes too, but those who do not have any visible disfigurement. Second, some deformity due to leprosy, either loss of digits or disfigured digits. And third, they may face extreme physical deformity like loss of hands and feet. Second component is lack of sensory abilities in seeing, that means visual impairment. This is a condition in which a person is not able to use his or her vision for performing day-to-day life activities and any gainful employment. This disability limits the communication ability of the individuals and it is further classified into two types. First is blindness and second is low vision. First, blindness. Blindness is a condition where a person has, even after best possible refractive corrections, completely lacked the ability of seeing or has visual acuity less than 3 by 60 meter or 10 by 200 Snellens or field of vision limited to less than 10 degree. All these cases refer to complete loss of vision and that's why here the people are called as the blind. Second category of this lack of seeing ability consists of low vision. Low vision is a condition in which even after best possible refractive corrections in the better eye, a person has visual acuity not exceeding than 6 by 18 meters or less than 20 by 60 feet up to 3 by 60 meter or 10 by 200 Snellens, or field of vision is limited to an angle between 10 degree to 40 degree. Third is lack of sensory ability in hearing, that means hearing impairment. Hearing impairment refers to a disability condition wherein a person is unable to use his or her hearing ability for performing day-to-day life activities, including gainful employment. It limits the communication ability of the individuals. Hearing impairment can be either completely or maybe partial. On the basis of this, it is further classified as into two categories as deaf and hard of hearing. First, deaf. A person is called as deaf when he or she suffers from hearing loss of 70 decibels in speech frequencies in both the ears. This is complete loss of hearing ability in a person. Second is hard of hearing. If a person suffers from hearing loss of 60 to 70 decibels in the speech frequencies in both the ears, this is a partial loss of hearing ability in a person, and such individuals are capable of partially using their ability of hearing. Third is lack of ability in speech and language. This is basically a permanent disabling condition whereby the individual suffers from inability to produce speech and hence language that is expressive, and his or her communication ability gets limited. This may be due to either loss of larynx, that is the voice box, or due to inability to understand language due to the damaged brain part responsible for this. Second major category according to RPD Act is intellectual disabilities. These conditions depict restrictions or lack in the area of adaptive behaviors and intellectual functioning or skills in comparison to their peer groups. Adaptive behaviors include day-to-day life, social and practical adjustment skills, and that is expected from same age group children. Intellectual skills on the other hand include ability to reason, problem solving, etc. And it is further divided into two subcategories, that is first specific learning disability and the second one is autism spectrum disorder. First, specific learning disability. This refers to a mixed conditions whereby a child faces problems in the basic areas or the functions of learning like speaking, writing, comprehension, calculations, etc. These conditions are called as dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia or developmental aphasia according to the problems or according to the affected learning areas. Since these conditions affect a specific part of learning, and as a result whole of the learning of a child who suffer from these problems or who exist with these conditions, and that's why learning of the child is affected, and that's why this disability is referred to as specific learning disability. So ultimately this disability is called as specific learning disabilities. And second component of this intellectual disabilities is autism. The condition of autism refers to the inability to understand social and personal relationships, communications and relationships with other individuals. A person with a spectrum disorder, this autism is also part of autism spectrum disorder, which consists of a very divergent group of learners, and a person with autism spectrum disorder seems to mostly engrossed with self. A person with autism spectrum disorder seems to be mostly engrossed with the self. That is, the outer engagement of the child is limited. A child faces it very difficult to communicate with other people, and that's why the child seems to be mostly engrossed with the self. Since it's a developmental disorder, so if it is present, if autism or autism spectrum disorder is present in a child, it becomes visible by the age of 3 years. Third major category out of the 7 categories according to in this RPD Act is mental behavior. Mental behavior refers to mental illness wherein a person displays either notable moodiness or disorder of thinking or perception, orientation and memory that significantly affects a person's ability to make judgments and take decisions in their day-to-day life. And as a consequence, a person's day-to-day life gets affected, and so are his social and personal relationships. Fourth category, major category out of the 7 categories mentioned or covered in the RPD Act is disabilities due to chronic neurological conditions. Chronic neurological conditions refers to prolonged sufferings of an individual and lead to situations wherein a person loses independence in their day-to-day life activities. This is further classified into 2 types. First, multiple sclerosis, and second is Parkinson's disease. First, multiple sclerosis. It's a nervous system disease and disorder wherein the nerve cells, that is the neurons of the brain and spinal cord, get damaged. The symptoms varies in different individuals. However, pain in head or eyes or back of the eyes, motor coordination difficulties, weakness, spasm, and slurred speech are very common symptoms of those who have multiple sclerosis. Second of this is Parkinson. Parkinson is a nervous system disease that reflects as a muscular rigidity and slow and shaky head and hand movements. Due to this, reading, writing, vision, concentration, and motor coordination of the person reduces significantly and leads to lack in personal independence in day-to-day life affairs. Fifth major category out of the 7 categories mentioned in the RPD Act is disabilities due to blood disorder. This category, actually, this is for the first time in India, in our country, has been recognized as a disability category. These disorders require very careful attention towards the sufferers, and that is those who suffer from blood disorder problems. They require more extensive and intensive support on the part of others, on the part of the family, on the part of the teachers, and on the part of society as a whole. These are of further 3 types. First, hemophilia, second is thalassemia, and the third one is sickle cell anemia. Hemophilia is a hereditary disease wherein the ability of the blood to clot easily reduces. Due to this, even a very small injury can be a very serious affair, and it can be even a life-threatening or fatal condition for the concerned. It is normally found among males, while females act as the carriers of this disease. Thalassemia is another hereditary disease wherein the blood possesses very less amount of hemoglobin. Therefore, the oxygen supply to the body is less, and therefore the person suffers from lack of appetite, liver diseases, jaundice, fatigue, and weakness. And due to this, the academic and other social work of the individual are affected. Third of this category is sickle cell anemia. Sickle cell anemia is a chronic disease wherein the red blood cells of the person affected turns sickle shape. That means they take oval shape, and or we can say that they take the shape of half moon, and due to this it results into less hemoglobin possession by the blood, and it further leads to chronic anemia, and therefore the person concerned requires blood or iron supplement more often, and this condition lead to other problems of the individual like social functioning, adjustment, and education too. Sixth of the major 7 categories mentioned in the RPD Act is multiple disabilities. Multiple disability is a condition wherein there is a concurrent existence, that means coexistence of more than one or more of the disability conditions identified as disabilities in this act. For example, it can be a condition of deaf blindness, it can be a condition of hearing and speech impairment altogether, that is simultaneously in a single individual at a time. Seventh and last categories of the 7 major categories of RPD Act is any other categories to be notified later. This Act of 2016, that is PWD Act, it provides scope and flexibility to add any other medical or disease conditions as disability in addition to the disability conditions mentioned in this Act. And before inclusion of any new category, it needs to be notified by the central government. This provision has been kept so that for addition of any disability as a disability category into this Act, it may not be a very lengthy process, because we had earlier experiences, we have earlier experience of PWD Act 1995 mentioning only 7 categories of disability. Since inclusion of any disability requires changes in the legislation, and sometimes it takes too time and it's a very lengthy process, so just to make this process simple, this provision has been kept here. In this way, today we discussed a very vast and recent account of disability classification as per the RPD Act 2016. In order to ensure education of children and persons with disabilities, it is first and the foremost to understand their ability that exists as diversity. Only after this level of understanding we can further understand their characteristics and accordingly give recommendations for their education. After their types and classification, we need to discuss their characteristics too, and then educational adaptations needed to ensure their education, so that differently abled children or children with disabilities, they can also actualize their potentials on an equal basis with others in the society. To conclude, we can say that differently abled children also, just like normal children, are children first and children with disabilities later. As we have discussed, they also have potentials just like normal children with them. But we need to improve the environment, we need to extend support to them so that they can actualize their potential. In addition to this, today we have discussed various categories of disability which are covered in RPD Act 2016. We have discussed classification based on RPD Act 2016 because RPD Act 2016 gives a very diverse classification, and it's a very recent account of classification, and it is not only in India but it is regarded as a very diverse classification around even the world. So we have discussed 7 major categories of disability as per the RPD Act, and in addition to this we have discussed that RPD Act 2016 has given space for inclusion of any other medical condition or disability in the future too. This is one of the additional feature of this Act. So in this way, today we have discussed differently abled children or children with disabilities. I hope that this session will be very beneficial for you. Thank you very much.